Good morning everyone. Kapwa ko Filipino, tara magbasa na tayo ng ating history book, sariling history. History of the Filipino People by Agoncillo and Guerrero. Today is 08 March 2023. History of the Filipino People, Part 6, the Third Republic. Nandito na tayo sa topic number 25, the HUKBALAHAP movement. Ito yung hukbong bayan laban sa Hapon. Diba HUKBALAHAP yun ang meaning yan? Okay, ulit. The HUKBALAHAP movement has its deep roots in the Spanish encomienda system, which developed into a system of exploitation. The numerous abuses, injustices, and cruelties perpetrated by the encomenderos upon the Filipino peasants led to uprisings that failed because of lack of unity and leadership. Nevertheless, the seeds of revolt were planted in the minds of the peasants. In the 19th century, Filipino landlordism rose, and with it more abuses. The agrarian problem, far from being solved, became acute. It was not until the coming of the Americans that certain reforms were initiated to lessen the tension between tenants and landlords. But the reforms were palliative in nature and did not actually solve the problem. With political consciousness, the peasants were united by educated but poor leaders. The most potent of these peasant organizations was the HUKBALAHAP, which began as a resistance organization against the Japanese and ended as a movement against the government. Spanish origins. There is no record of any agrarian unrest in pre-Spanish times. The unrest is, insofar as records are concerned, dates from the Spanish period when the encomienda was established about 1570. High taxes coupled with unspeakable abuses connected therewith led to widespread discontent among the people. Theoretically, the encomienda was an excellent institution designed to protect the people from exploitation and to educate them in the Christian faith. Actually, however, it was used as a tool of exploitation by the rapacious encomenderos. The people were dispossessed of the land upon which they stake their very lives. Such a feudal setup led to the widening of the gap between the ruling class and the people. To make the rule more effective, insofar as economic exploitation was concerned, the Spanish officials and friars bestowed little favors on the descendants of the Filipino rajas and nobles by making the latter a sort of middleman between the rulers and the ruled. The result was more and more exploitation of the poorer class by both the Spaniards and their Filipino stooges. At the same time, the prior estate, legally and illegally acquired, grew to such an extent as to swallow up the parcels of land belonging either to the public domain or to the small planters who were too ignorant to secure legal rights over their property. The abolition of the encomienda late in the 17th century did not mend matters. On the contrary, the friars expanded their estates, with the Filipinos continuing as tenants and agricultural workers. A small number of Filipino tenants, however, turned leases and became economically well off. In the 19th century, they constituted the Filipino landed aristocracy, but while an exceedingly small number of Filipinos became prosperous, the great bulk of the people became serfs. The peasants remained illiterate and were burdened with heavy taxes and other unjust and iniquitous impositions which made life unbearable for them. The upshot was agrarian unrest, which exploded into uprisings and revolts throughout the country. The uprisings were suppressed ruthlessly, for the government was in unholy alliance with the Spanish landlords. The life of the peasant during the Spanish period was characterized by absolute penury and degradation. The customary division of the crops was 50-50, with the peasants furnishing the tools and work animals. Under the setup, the peasant earned no more than 20 pesos a year. Wow! 20 pesos a year? Paano ka mabubuhay nito? Okay. Okay, ulit ha. The customary division of the crop was 50-50. Ibig sabihin niya guys, 50-50. With the peasants furnishing the tools and work animals, under the setup, the peasant earned no more than 20 pesos a year. Tingnan mo naman guys, gaano kamura noong araw. On top of this, he was invariably the victim of his landlord's rapacity. He was compelled to borrow money from his landlord at an exorbitant interest. The result was that the peasant became heavily indebted to the landlord. This indebtedness was inherited by the peasant's children and children's children. Hanggang kaapu-apuhan, may utang. Thereby pinning them down, including the unborn generation, to the land without any hope of release from servitude. This inhumanity to man was compounded by making the peasant work for the landlord without pay. The peasant's chickens too were for the landlord. His children were the servants of the landlord, who never had the heart to pay them a single centavo. Under such conditions, the peasant had no other recourse than to gamble. His fatalism made him take a chance of cockfighting to increase his income. In this, as in the other forms of gambling, only the owner of the cockpit benefited from the soltadas or fights, because a certain percentage of the bets was taken by the cockpit owner. Losses in the cockfights meant more borrowings from the landlord. On top of this, the peasant, ignorant, fanatical, and encouraged in his fanaticism by order to participate. Okay, ulit. Na-advance ako nabasa. On top of this, the peasant, ignorant, fanatical, and encouraged in his fanaticism by the friars, had to pawn whatever little possessions he had in order to participate in the annual fiesta. Fiestas were encouraged by the friars for such occasions, gave them more money in the form of payments for masses, candles, scapularies, and other religious appurtenances. The net result was the increased dependence of the peasant on his landlord, continued loss of self-respect and income, and an abject life. Ito talaga yung okasyon na huwag mong ipangutang kung wala ka namang panghanda. Diba? Lilipas din naman yung fiesta na yan eh. Okay. Ayan o, the net result was the increased dependence of the peasant on his landlord, continued loss of self-respect and income, and an abject life. Agrarian unrest under the Americans. Basahin ko pa ba ito? Mahaba-haba yata guys. Agrarian unrest under the Americans. The factors that helped shape the filibustero mentality of the second half of the 19th century arose out of the conditions brought about by the economic structure of the Spanish colonial system. Of these factors, the most important was economic. The cruelties, thievery, and injustices of the Spanish officials and friars were perpetrated in order to amass wealth and with it power. Having tasted wealth and power, they tried their best to maintain the status quo on the one hand and to subvert any movement for reforms on the other. In the last 2 decades of the 19th century, the Filipino middle class rose to prominence and initiated the reform movement. Such a movement necessarily resulted in a social tension for the Spanish ruling class, highly suspicious of any movement that would curtail their vested interests, refused to give in to the demands of the Filipino reformist group. The tension is now when in 1896, the masses led by Andres Bonifacio took to the field against the Spanish oppressors. The Revolution of 1896 was a revolt of the masses, for the latter bore the brunt of the armed conflict and who, in their desire to change the status quo, initiated it in the first place and fought to the last in the second place. Socially and economically, however, the revolution was a failure. While it dislodged the Spanish ruling class and drove Spain's prestige to the precipice, the Filipino upper class rushed into the vacuum created by the disappearance of the Spanish rulers. The peasants continued to play the role of the exploited after the revolution and through the American period. The Americans in it through somewhat softened a hard core of the system of exploitation, but the basic conditions remained: poverty, ignorance, tendency to gambling, lack of self-respect, and religious fanaticism. The Americans could very well have solved the agrarian problem at the turn of the century, but they did not. For the men they placed at the helm of the government were in general of the cacique class, the class which learned from and inherited the Spanish colonial's technique of mass exploitation. Usury, which thrived during the Spanish regime, continued to exist under the American rule. The landlords improved upon the techniques of their former Spanish masters and invented ways of circumventing the anti-usury law. Several techniques were employed to exploit the peasant. The most notorious was the takipan, which consisted in paying 100% interest. The talindoa consisted in the peasant paying 50% interest on a loan. The takalanan consisted in the peasant paying what he borrowed in kind, say, palay. If a peasant borrowed, say, 50 pesos, and the cost of a kaban of palay at the time the loan was made was 2 pesos, he had to pay his landlord 25 kabans at the time of harvest, even if the cost of the palay had risen to 5 pesos per kaban. Ang mura talaga ng araw, guys. 5 pesos per kaban, ngayon nasa 1,000 na yung isang kaban. If the price per kaban dropped, the original 2 pesos per kaban was put into effect. In either case, the peasant was the loser. In the pasunod, the peasant was forced to borrow from his landlord whether he liked it or not. The same technique was employed as in the takalanan. In the baligtaran, the palay was converted into money at, say, 1 peso per kaban at the time the loan was made. At harvest time, the value of the palay was increased or decreased so as to favor the landlord. Such practices added to the misery of the peasant, the realization of their lowly condition, and the failure of the government to stop the caciques from their nefarious practices led to uprisings in Luzon in 1931 and in 1935. General Stonehayden, former acting Governor-General of the Philippines and a close student of Philippine affairs, said, "I doubt, however, if you could find 10 Americans in the islands who do not believe that the poor peasants who rose against constituted authority at Tayug, Pangasinan, were rebelling chiefly against caciquism, agrarian oppression, and constabulary abuses." One Filipino newspaper strongly expressed this view, and Thomas Confessor, the ever-outspoken director of the Bureau of Commerce and Industry, told his people that this was the case, adding that dangerous discontent based upon oppression, and injustice existed over large areas of the plain of Central Luzon. Bukas na itong the rise of socialism and communism. Bye everyone. God bless.